Russia has launched drone strikes on Poland, and Western fighter jets managed to shoot down only 4 out of 19 drones. Today we are speaking with Mark Toth, a leading analyst on U.S. national security and foreign policy, to get his perspective on these alarming developments and what they mean for regional security. Mr. Toth, welcome to our studio.
Sofia, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Last night was uneasy not only in Ukraine but also in Poland. Official reports say this is the first time such a large number of Russian drones have entered Polish airspace. According to official sources, we are talking about 19 drones, and unofficial sources like Polish media suggest 23 drones. What's your take on the situation?
Sofia, that's a great question because multiple things were going on yesterday. First and foremost, Poland was finally experiencing what your country's been going through since February of 2022. These daily drone attacks that tragically are killing Ukrainian civilians almost on a nightly basis. And Poland woke up, had to wake up to that this morning after living through that nightmare last night. I think two things are happening there. One, it was messaging from Putin. He's testing NATO. He wants to see what the defenses will be from a probing action standpoint. And he also wants to understand what the political resolve of NATO is in terms of any kind of response to it. So what we're seeing here is very important. It marks a turning point in this war, and it's significant. So while it may have only been 19 or 23 drones, the impact far outweighs that. It's much, much bigger.
For the first time, NATO fighter jets engaged Russian drones. And out of 19 drones, we know that only 4 were successfully intercepted by fighter jets as F-16s and F-35s. How do you assess NATO's response, and do you think it was strong enough for Russia?
Yeah, look, anytime that you're missing drones and you're not achieving a 90% ratio, which is what the U.S. military kind of has as a standard, so does Israel in terms of what we saw and witnessed during its war with Iran. Basically, it was able to interdict 90% of all ballistic missiles and drones coming, and a much higher percentage actually on the drone side of it. That's disappointing if that does indeed turn out to be the percentage, that only 4 were intercepted. Now, that said, there's some important caveats to be made. We don't know whether or not the decision was made not to intercept some of those simply because the trajectory was on a path that wasn't going to damage anything or cause civilian damage or harm. And so they may have just been allowed to hit the ground rather than spending the dollars, if you will, on the missiles to take them down. So that ratio might actually be much better. But it's a sign that, look, NATO is not yet fully prepared. Clearly, they were caught off guard in terms of what these drones were doing, but they did respond quickly. And certainly we saw the scattering of NATO aircraft in the skies and refueling as they kept an air patrol on it. But it's a warning call. It should be a wake-up call. I will say this, one last final note here. It was a welcome departure from past practice. In the past, NATO hasn't, nor has Poland, interdicted these Russian drones as they have been incurring into Russian airspace. I'm glad that they did this time. It sends Russia back an important message that NATO is not going to take it, that Poland is not going to take it.
Debris from drones was found not only near the border this time, but also 300 to 500 kilometers inland. One drone even damaged a residential building. Do you see this as an escalation, and why would Putin target civilian areas in Poland?
Yeah, absolutely, it's an escalation. Look, Putin for quite some time has been conducting a hybrid warfare against Europe, and perhaps most notably the attempted bombings of the DHL jet freighters, both in Warsaw but also in London. They failed, but they tried, is a sign of the kinetic action that Putin has been willing to take. This time, though, it was more overt in terms of these drones. There's no way that these drones simply wandered that far, that deep into Poland without being programmed to do that. Look, they operate on GPS systems. It's very clear that they were sent there purposely. And the fact that they were being targeted at civilians, again, plays into this Russian mentality that somehow they're going to intimidate, Ukrainians, for instance, into submission or capitulation. And they may be seeming to try to create that same kind of sense inside of Poland and getting them to say to their leaders, no, this isn't a war we want. We're not willing to fight it. I think that message will fail. I mean, if anything that Ukraine has taught us, much like the British taught us during World War II, during the Blitz, is that when you tend to bomb people, you actually tend to increase their resolve to defy you and to resist and to fight back against you. And I suspect that Poland will, be side by side with Ukrainians in that same kind of brave response that your countrymen and women have had.
But at the same time, Polish Prime Minister Donald Toth called that drone strike more of a large-scale provocation rather than an attack. Why is the West so cautious about using the word attack?
At this point, there could be some legalese involved there. An attack might cause him to try and have to trigger Article 5, and I don't think they're willing to go there yet. At this point, Poland has basically called for Article 4, which is a provision of the NATO Charter that says, look, everyone needs to come together and talk. They'll likely do that by Zoom. Now, is that enough? Probably not, because I think what President Donald Tusk needs to be doing is to step back and look at the bigger picture here, something that I wrote about with my colleague, Colonel John Sweet, retired U.S. Army intelligence colonel who had served in NATO and was responsible for intel, in Eastern Europe. One of the things that we wrote about is that you've got to look at the timing here. This just comes shortly after Putin returned from the Shanghai Cooperation Summit that he held with that was held between Putin, Chinese leader Xi Jinping, as well as North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un. He likely came away from that emboldened and felt that they have his back now more than ever. We're certainly seeing that on the battlefields in Ukraine as more and more Chinese technology shows up, not as dual-use technology anymore, but outright production of weapons and munitions and so forth. So I think that's important to Tusk and to Europe to take a look at, is that this has probably got much more behind it than what previously was thought. And it's basically not just Putin that is signaling to Poland, to NATO, and especially to Donald Trump, that we're going to take the fight to you. It's, in many ways, a message that's coming in directly from Xi and Kim Jong-un as well.
I think one of the questions which is most interested for Polish people now, it's what should happen in order to activate this Article 5, because now it seems unclear what kind of conditions need to be on the battlefield or front line, or what should happen for the targeting this article.
Right. I understand why people are probably going to focus on Article 5, but it does call for material breaches. So in other words, it's not anything that might trigger it. It has to have a material military impact on what's happening inside of any given NATO member state. And 19 drones, while deeply troubling, is probably not sufficient to cause an Article 5 trigger. I think what it does need to be triggering, though, is absolute resolve that Europe itself needs to be making red lines. And they can start to do those. Those can be articulated. And I think this would be the best messaging that Poland could do, is start interdicting these drones over Ukraine, obviously with Kiev's approval and coordination. Provide some kind of air shield in Western Ukraine, maybe as far as Lviv, ideally further. In my opinion, I'd love to see Kiev protected as well, where these drones are starting to be shot down by Polish Air Force fighters so that they don't even come close to reaching Polish airspace. And as an added benefit, they also don't reach any intended Ukrainian targets.
In your recent article, which you mentioned about in The Hill, you described together with your colleague Colonel Sweet that this attack on Poland is also kind of a signal to President Trump, who last week met with Polish President Karol Nawrocki. What kind of reaction do you expect from the U.S. president? Might he respond with maybe new threats of new wave of sanctions?
Yeah, unfortunately, so far, the president has been muted somewhat. He was out at a dinner last night. It was clear that he had been informed of what was happening in Poland. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, came out and made statements to the effect that he was aware of it as well. But so far, we've not seen any strong condemnation of what they did. But I think that he should. Look, and in many ways, Putin is taunting Trump here. Not just after the Alaska summit, but clearly it's important to take note as well, just as it was important to note China and that connection with the Shanghai conference with Putin. It's important to note that it just took place on the heels of that meeting between Karol Nawrocki, the the president of Poland, with Donald Trump in the White House, where Donald Trump was quoted as saying, "Look, we're willing to send more troops to Poland, meaning U.S. troops, if Poland wants." And so this is certainly messaging back from Putin to him, to Donald Trump, that, look, I heard you and it's not acceptable. Now the onus is on Trump to say, no, look, I'm the one that holds the cards and I'm going to hold you accountable for this. But so far, unfortunately, we've not heard that yet from the White House.
And also interestingly that these strikes came after the Donald Tusk announced the closure of border with Belarus yesterday. And for the first time, drones came from the Belarusian territory. Do you see the connection between these events?
Right, there is, and there's an important military exercise that happens annually here called the Sabad exercise, which is a joint effort between Russia and Belarus. And so part of what we probably saw last evening in Poland was a probing action. In other words, if you're going to have a training session training exercises with Russian and Belarusian troops, what better to prepare for than seeing how NATO reacts to some type of attack coming from the Russian side and the Belarusian side. So I think it was interesting, and it's really important that you pointed it out. If these just didn't cross over from Ukrainian airspace, but Belarusian airspace as well, that tells me that they were testing NATO's air defenses. They wanted to see what reacted, what didn't react, how quickly they reacted, and all those things can be dialed into these training exercises that are upcoming. So I think that's very significant. And I think it's just, more signaling from Russia that, look, Belarus and Russia are partners, and we're going to view this, as a joint effort, if it comes to that, against NATO member states like Poland in the future.
Should we expect more incidents like this during this exercise called Zapad or West 2025?
Yeah, it's a good question. Time will tell. I do think overall, though, what I would anticipate until the West pushes back firmly and basically starts shooting down these drones before they ever near NATO airspace, and that means interdicting them over Ukraine itself, which would be an added benefit to your country. I think we will see continued efforts like this for Russia to intimidate the West. Look, the gloves are off. They clearly have been willing to do this. Of course, we're getting all the typical denials that come out of the Kremlin and basically lying about it, claiming no one knows that these are Russian drones, et cetera. That's obviously, BS, to put it politely, on your show. So I think we will see more of this. Whether it comes in these exercises or not, hard to tell, because at that point, when you're doing exercises, you're somewhat more exposed, and they may not want to provoke NATO at that point into taking action or to believing that NATO's under attack again. And then it might be prove more costly to Russian and Belarusian forces.
It's unlikely Russian drones could have reached Poland if Ukraine had a stronger air defense system. Allies like Germany and France recently announced new arms deliveries. But should we expect, especially after this situation, Ukraine's air defenses to be strengthened even more?
Yeah, great question, Colonel, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the fact that the drones are able to travel that far, and you compare that to Israel's success rate in basically interdicting, stopping, if you will, destroying the Iranian drones that traveled even further, is a sign of weakness on the part of NATO. And Colonel Sweet and I, the individual that wrote the article with me this morning in The Hill, we've long called for more robust defenses of Ukraine, not simply to protect the cities, and as vital as that is, and civilian targets, but to be able to allow Ukraine also to push up some of its air assets to protect your frontline forces in the Donbass, and then further south towards Crimea and Zaporizhia as you defend against any kind of Russian movements coming from Crimea. That's important as well. So absolutely, there needs to be more. And we've kind of called these type of calls as game changers. The West needs to be sending game changer messages to Putin to change his cost calculus, make his war in Ukraine unacceptably high for him. Tragically, he's willing to spend lives to do that. 1 million plus men and women, Russian soldiers, along with some North Koreans and Chinese, have been killed or wounded, and that doesn't seem to affect his calculus. But I think what would change his calculus is if his attacks have no effect while Ukraine's attacks, your deep strikes, especially with the Flamingo coming onto line, your long-range deep precision strike weapon, if that calculus changes and he's not having any substantive impact in Ukraine, while Ukraine is having more and more, such as destroying 17 to 18% of their oil and energy infrastructure, then that might change Putin's thinking of whether or not he can continue to sustain this war in Ukraine.
Given the scale of NATO involvement, do you think we could be moving toward a joint air patrols over Ukraine, which could basically help to protect Poland and other eastern flank countries?
Look, I hope so. I mean, I saw earlier today that President Zelensky called just for that. And Europe has long talked about some kind of sky shield. Now, it's always been caged in a post-war environment. Now, again, I think Ukrainians, I don't need to tell you, you know that Putin is not going to accept any peace as a long-term peace. He interprets peace as a pause, and then he's going to come at Ukraine again. So I think the sooner that a sky shield comes into place with a coalition of the willing, if you will, if they're not technically NATO fighters, but they're going to have to be. I mean, basically, for that type of shield to be effective, it's going to take Polish Air Force forces, it's going to take British, it's going to take U.S. forces, and it's going to take the coordination of U.S. intel, as well as logistical support, the air tankers, et cetera, to make sure that they can stay up in the skies and actually patrol. I do think that it needs to be happening, and I think Zelensky is right to call for it. Whether that will happen or not, I remain skeptical, sadly. I hope that it does, and I'm going to keep calling for it.
I have a last question, because now just Donald Trump out his post on this Toth social media platform, his first reaction basically to this incident in Poland, I quote, "What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go." That's it. That's the reaction of U.S. president.
Yeah, and unfortunately, look, and I hadn't seen that before you had talked about it. It's more the same coming from Putin. It's almost like he's a bystander and just reacting like you or I might watching our own TV sets at home. He needs to be drawing red lines. He doesn't need to just be observing. So, at this point, I find that disappointing. I think he can go further. I think he should have been saying, look, Putin, you've crossed a red line. There's going to be immediate consequences. And one of those, and it would have been a perfect time to do it, is I'm going to ask the Senate to finally pass the secondary sanctions against you to ensure that we further harm your economy as you prosecute this war. So, again, I'm going to give him a little bit of leeway because it's early in the day. I hope he comes out with something more forceful. But if that's it, then sadly, the analyst in me just thinks it's more the same coming from Trump, that he's not just willing as of yet to tell Putin he's crossed a red line that's going to change Trump's calculus.
Thank you for this conversation, Mr. Toth. Thank you for your insight and analysis.
Much appreciated, Sofia. Thank you for having me.